The night before he died, Jesus of Nazareth gathered with his disciples for one final Passover meal. During the dinner, Jesus introduced a new ritual. The Lord Jesus, in the night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup also after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." This special rite is called the Eucharist, from the Greek noun Eucharistia, which means thanksgiving. The Catholic Church teaches that the whole substance of the bread and the wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ, but that the appearances or accidents of bread and wine remain. This teaching is called transubstantiation. The Church also teaches that the Eucharist is the same sacrifice of the cross, offered in an unbloody manner. The Mass is a series of ceremonies that incorporates this sacrificial offering of the bread and wine, as well as elements of the synagogue service and elements of the worship that occurred in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem before it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. At first, the language used for the Mass was Greek. When Greek ceased to be the usual language of the Roman Christians, the change was made to Latin. Since then, the Mass gradually went through an organic development over the centuries and remained in Latin as it spread throughout the world. The traditional Latin Mass is often referred to as the Tridentine Mass because it was standardized at the Council of Trent by Pope St. Pius V. On April 3, 1969, Pope Paul VI introduced a new Mass, which would be said in the common language of the nation in which it was celebrated. There was also an attempt to make the Mass more appealing to non-Catholics by changing and removing many of the traditional prayers.
I became Catholic in the summer of 2005. I had a lot of free time to read, so I decided that, there's this thing called the Bible. It's very influential. I should probably get around to reading it. So I went through it, and a week later I finished that.
I was Catholic my whole life, but I've only been practicing seriously and independently for 2.5 years.
I'd been an atheist for a time, a deist for a time, and I was born and raised Catholic, but I never believed it. But what really led me back into it was this search for truth. And I think that that's why the only reason anyone should become Catholic. When Chesterton was asked why he converted to Catholicism, he said, "I could give you 10,000 reasons, but they're going to all boil down to because I think it's true."
I was born and baptized to a Catholic family. I was never forced to go to church, so eventually I started going because I wanted to.
Even before I knew about the Latin Mass, I was always slightly disappointed at the experience of the new Mass. I just felt like it didn't really inspire the reverence that it should, considering what's supposed to be taking place on the altar.
I actually found out about the Latin Mass by Facebook stalking. I was actually looking on Dan McGurr's Facebook profile, and apparently him and a group of other NYU Catholic students found it necessary to create a Facebook group devoted to the Latin Mass.
I started going to the Latin Mass more than a year ago, a year and a half ago. I found out about it through Dan McGurr.
When I decided to move to New York, the first thing I did was find out where I could attend one. So I actually didn't get the idea from Dan McGurr.
I went to, I think, latinmass.org or something like that, and I found out that they had a Latin Mass at St. Agnes, so I said, "Oh, what the heck, I'll go."
And it's a really unique experience. It's very calming, and it's very humbling and very somber.
The first time I went, it was amazing. I was awestruck, and I think I actually cried. I didn't have a missal the first time, so I didn't understand very much of it. But the second time I went, this lovely old lady sitting next to me let me borrow hers, and at the end of the Mass, she gave it to me.
Alan Ball describes it in 6 Feet Under as very Fellini-like, and it's very ceremonial, like people walking around speaking language you don't understand, and everything is very by the book, and I don't know, I kind of like it.
A lot of it is the choir. They do Gregorian chants, and they just sound magical.
When you enter a church in New York City, part of it makes you feel like you're in a medieval cathedral.
The way that the liturgy is generally executed could be done in the new Mass the same way, but it generally tends not to be because of a new spirit that's sort of in the Church, to make it more of a mundane activity.
Despite the attempt to make it more appealing to non-Catholics, according to the official Catholic directory, between 1965 and 2002, the number of converts to the Catholic Church decreased by 37%.
If you really get into the ceremony and the beauty and sort of the rapture of this classic act, then you're going to enjoy it. But most people, they want to feel like they're going to be uplifted, have really happy and perky songs that just make them love Jesus. But that's just, I think that's what people want. People want, like Jesus the buddy and not, Jesus the leader.
The thing that disturbs traditionalists most about it is just the way that it's conducted. That people can be singing songs that were written 2-3 years ago that are almost devoid of scriptural content.
In the new Mass, the priest is turned around the whole Mass to face the people, even when he's consecrating the Eucharist and offering the sacrifice on the altar. Whereas it's been the tradition since the advent of the Church that when they worship, everyone faces east together.
While synagogue worship was oriented toward Jerusalem, the place of the temple, Christians now look toward Christ, whose future coming in glory is aptly symbolized by the brilliance of the rising sun.
Okay, I'll be the first to admit I have no idea what this great controversy is, but from what I can discern, it seems to be that there was this whole break and there was this other pious person went off and decided that they wanted to have just Latin because of the Vatican II thing. I don't really understand. I'll be completely honest.
Okay, so the controversy with the Latin Mass, the first one is the Novus Ordo Mass. At the time it was unveiled, a lot of people thought it wasn't reverent enough, so much so that a small group of people even broke off from the church and formed their own society called the Society of St. Pius X, which celebrated the Latin Mass exclusively and even went so far to claim on their website you should only attend the Old Mass. The guy who formed that society consecrated a lot of bishops, he ordained a lot of priests, but he did it without any approval from the Vatican.
I think that small things, actions, symbolic gestures have very big signification. If your actions don't really reflect certain beliefs as they should, I feel like over time the beliefs themselves will be lost, especially if the Mass, the liturgy itself, is the main source from which people draw their faith.
If Christianity is true, if Catholicism is true, I don't think we need to do anything to make it more appealing. I think its truth and what it can give to us is enough that if we try to dilute it or do anything else to it, then I think we take something away.